If you're looking for a fun Halloween project this year, but you kind of want to challenge yourself a little bit, this colorwork knit bat hat might just be the project for you. With this little hat, you can learn how to knit with 2 colors at once, a really cool technique if you want to make some interesting projects, and how to catch long floats, another technique that's really necessary to know for colorwork knitting. You can have it worked up in a couple of short evenings and enjoy it this Halloween. The step-by-step tutorial is coming up. Now I know I always say this, but the yarn really makes this project more interesting, this time with the marled, kind of heathered look in this sugar bush shanty yarn. This color is called Chimney Smoke, and it's a merino linen blend, which is kind of unique, and it's really soft and the texture is really pretty. You could substitute with another light worsted weight yarn. This one actually is in the worsted weight category, but it is on the lighter side than most medium weight yarns. So if you do decide to substitute for this pattern, you do want to check your gauge and make sure it all matches so your hat fits as you expect it to. Now, if you're new to this type of yarn and how it comes in hanks, kind of a braid like this, the first thing you need to do is unwind it. We can't just use it straight as it is if we were working with a skein or a cake of yarn. So the first thing you'll need to do is unwind it, remove the ties, and wind it into a ball or a cake. Now, if you haven't seen yarn like this before, you probably don't have a yarn swift or a ball winder. That's honestly the most efficient way to take a hank and put it into a usable cake or ball of yarn. But if you don't have one, don't worry. Honestly, I don't even have one. So you can do this by hand, it just takes a little bit longer. So as you can see, if you don't have one, no worries. Lay the big long loop around your knees if you're by yourself and just wind it around your fingers and wind it into a ball. Another thing that works really well is if you have a helper, can put the big loop around their hands and you can wind a ball from that. That works really well too. Another thing that's a nice to have but not totally necessary to have is a yarn bowl like this. It'll make things a lot easier as you work up the project because it'll keep the ball confined to this little space and you won't have it jumping off the couch and rolling across the floor. Okay, so first up, the cast on. So wrap the yarn around the needle 20 times to guesstimate how much yarn is needed for 20 stitches. Then fold it over however many times you need for your cast on number. Now that brings me to the pattern. This one is available in 6 sizes, so you'll want to refer to the pattern to get the cast on number for the size you want to make. As always, you can view the pattern completely for free on my website, or if you prefer to have a copy in hand to print or save for later, you can pick up the PDF from my shop. I'll have a link to both of those options in the description below, so you can do what works best for you. Now, if the long tail cast on is new to you, go ahead and drape the yarn over your needle and make sure to steady that with your finger and gather it in your hands like this. Then swing the needle down and grab the loop on your thumb, swing it up and grab the loop on your finger, then drop the thumb loop over the tip of the needle. Then keep going for as many cast on stitches as you need for the size you're making. So I'm working on the teen size here, kind of in between, so I will have 112 stitches total. Alright, when you have all your stitches cast on, lay it flat like this, and make sure the braid is along the inside and there are no twists. That's really, really important. You'll also need to add a stitch marker so you know where the beginning of the round is. And then knit the first stitch to join the 2 ends together. Then knit the second stitch as well. So the next 2 stitches will be purl stitches, so go ahead and pull the yarn forward and purl twice. And that's the repeat. Knit 2, purl 2. If you've done everything correctly at the end of this first round, you should end with 2 purls. Then pass the marker over and work the same repeat. Knit 2, purl 2. And that's all we'll do for the band. Another way to look at it, if it's easier for you to visualize, you're knitting the knits and you're purling the purls. So that's the band repeat for this pattern, just a 2x2 rib. Now the length of the band is a little different for each size, so you want to refer to your pattern again for the number of rounds you should work this repeat. And when you get that finished, it'll look something like this. Now before we start the color pattern, we first need to knit 2 rounds, and that's the same for all sizes. So go ahead and knit every stitch for 2 rounds. So here's the color diagram you'll be working for the color work portion of this pattern. Each block represents a knit stitch in the gray or the white color, and it spans 41 stitches and 25 rows. Now in your hat, you have more than 41 stitches each round, and you will have more than 25 rows. Just keep that in mind for later. So if you look down here, this block represents the first stitch of your first row. See, you've got a 1 and a 1. Now this stitch over here would be your 12th stitch of the second row. So that's how you read the diagram. The numbers on the bottom are your stitch numbers, and the numbers on the side are the row numbers. And if you look at the first 2 rows, there are no white blocks or no white stitches, and that's the 2 rounds we just did, where we knit every stitch. So next we'll pick up on the 3rd row here, and we have 20 gray stitches first, followed by 1 white stitch. So I've knit up to that point and I'm ready to add the first white stitch. So get your white yarn ready, loop it over, and insert your hook into that next stitch, the one that's a white block on your diagram. Then loop the new yarn, the white yarn, on your needle and pull it through to finish the stitch. Then it's a good idea to tie this to the back and secure it. Now going back to the diagram, that's the only white stitch of this round. So I don't have to worry about knitting with the white again, but we will need to carry it along the inside so the floats, or the stretches of yarn in your non-working color, don't mess with the sizing or catch on things as you're trying to wear this hat. So as a general rule of thumb, you'll catch the unused yarn after working about 4 stitches. There's a couple different ways to do this. First is what you might do the first round or 2 when you're still kind of figuring it all out and figuring out how to work with 2 yarns at once. And the other way I'll show you, you'll probably do as you get more comfortable working with 2 colors. So for this more simple technique, insert the needle first and wrap it with the color you want to catch. Then pick up the working color, the working yarn, and wrap the needle as well, but remove your first color wrap from the needle before you finish the stitch. Now you see the white yarn is caught along the inside, and I can work 4 more stitches before I have to do that again. Now, I know what you're thinking, this is terrible. It's slow, it's clunky, and there's just no way I want to do that for an entire project. I get that. But this is something you can do if you only want to hold the yarn with one hand at a time, and you just kind of need to step your way through it so you can see what's going on and know how to get better and move into this more efficient way. So here is the more efficient way to carry floats along the back side of this project. Now the first thing you'll need to do is get your colors situated first, so hold them out from the project and make sure the color you want to carry, the white yarn in this case, is underneath the working yarn. Then gather both of them in your hands. And now to catch the yarn in this way, you'll insert your needle to knit. Make sure the needle is below the other yarn and knit as usual. Then as you're working your next few stitches and you don't want to catch the yarn, make sure your needle is above it when you knit those stitches. So there's a couple different things you're keeping track of throughout the colorwork portion of this pattern. The color diagram and working the colored stitches as shown there, but you're also catching the non-working yarn when you're beyond those 41 stitches. And you're doing so every 4 or 5 stitches. Now I know it sounds like a lot to deal with, and to be totally honest, it kind of feels like it for the first couple of rounds. But the more you work through it, the easier this will get. You'll be catching the yarn like a pro and only focusing on the diagram at the beginning of the round when it's needed. I don't do this type of knitting a lot, so although I already knew how to do these techniques, I still had to kind of warm myself up, and it took me about 5 or 6 rounds before I was knitting like this. Just remember when catching those floats, when the needle is under the non-working yarn, you'll catch it in the stitch. And when the needle is over the non-working yarn, you won't catch it in the stitch. As far as the diagram goes, it's best to cover up the parts you aren't working on yet so you can see just the row you need. A couple paper clips should do the trick if you have the printed version, or just a piece of paper covering your phone will work if you have the digital version. I'll be honest, I didn't do this at first, and I ended up frogging the entire color portion and starting over because my eye drifted in a couple different places before I realized it, and the pattern wasn't correct. So just something to keep in mind there, a little tip from somebody who learned the hard way. So with the techniques you just saw, work yourself through the color work portion of the pattern. We'll pick up with the crown decreases next. Now, if you're thinking, this would have been really great to have a month ago when I had more time to finish it before Halloween. Well, I do want to share my Patreon community with you in case it's something you might be interested in. I don't do a lot of promotion for this, but I thought in cases like this where we're working on holiday, time-sensitive things, well, my Patreon community, I lovingly call B.Hooked Insiders, well, they have access to patterns a month before they show up here on YouTube or on my website. So insiders get to download the PDF and watch an ad-free tutorial as well. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, or if you just want to support me and my mission with B.Hooked a little bit further, check out the Early Access Insider or the Insider Plus tiers. You can cancel at any time if your financial situation changes, or you simply change your mind. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Honestly, the fact that you might even consider contributing means the world to me. Check the description below for a link to that Patreon community. So this is what your project will look like when you have the color diagram completed. Now for the crown decreases. First of all, you can go ahead and trim the white yarn. You're not going to need that anymore. And make sure to keep your marker in place. Now for all of the sizes, you'll work some number of knits before the first decrease, and that number is size specific. So you'll want to refer to the pattern for the size you're making to get those specific numbers. Now again, I'm working the teen size, so I'm working 12 stitches, and then my decrease, which is a knit 2 together. So to work that stitch, insert the needle through the next 2 stitches, and knit them as if they were one. Then your repeat begins. Work your knit stitches, 12 in my case, followed by another knit 2 together. Then every decreasing round is followed by a knit round. And then we'll work another decreasing round. Are you seeing the pattern here? This time the number of knits before the decrease is one less than before. So I had 12 stitches between my decreases before. Well, this round I'll have 11. Then my knit 2 together and repeat. So that's the general theme for the crown decreases in this project. You have a decreased round followed by a knit round. And every time you come to a new decrease round, you'll work one less knit between the decreases. Again, be sure to refer to the pattern for the stitch count so you know exactly what to do for the size you're making. Now, as you continue to decrease, eventually the stitches will no longer stretch around the needles. When that happens, you need to transfer it to a set of double pointed needles, or in my case, a longer corded set that's in the same needle size, so I can work the remaining rounds using the magic loop method. So transferring the stitches is as easy as knitting the stitches onto the new pair of needles. That being said, it's best to make the transfer on one of your knit rounds, not your decreasing rounds. You will want to switch over to a locking stitch marker if you have one, or a paper clip or bobby pin will work if you don't have a locking marker. And you'll knit half of the stitches on the new needle. Then slide it through a little bit, flip it, and work the remaining stitches. So this will create the loop on the side you need to make it all work. Now I'm sure there are other ways to make this transition, and this one works for me, but if you already know how to do this, maybe in a slightly different way, do what works best for you. Okay, when all of the stitches are transferred, flip it so the working yarn is towards the back, and slide the front needle through the stitches. Then pull the back needle out, leaving a little bit of cord on the side, and continue knitting with that needle. Now this is probably a decreasing round for you, so don't forget to work your decreases when you're supposed to. And when you get to the end of the row, flip it, push the front needle through the stitches, and pull the back needle out of the stitches. And that's always your starting point for the magic loop. The front needle is where you work the stitches off, so the stitches need to be on the needle. And the back needle is the one you use to knit the stitches, so you have to pull that out and put it in place. Keep going with your crown decrease pattern, and we'll pick up with the finishing techniques next. You'll have a few stitches left on your needles for all sizes when you finish the crown decreasing pattern, and make sure you trim yourself a nice long tail. About 24 inches should give you plenty to work with. Thread that tail on a yarn needle, Then insert the needle through the first stitch knitwise and slide it off. Then into the next stitch and slide it off. And keep going for all the stitches on your needles. Then pull the tail to fasten it up and run it around the opening several times to secure it. You may even want to flip it inside out and run it along the inside as well before you trim it off. I found this pom-pom in my collection and it matched perfectly, so I decided to add it to my hat. Now this step is totally optional. You can use a faux fur pom-pom like this. You could make a pom-pom yourself, or you could not have one at all. Then all that's left to do is weave in the ends along the inside. That's all for now, friend. I hope you enjoy this project and it opens up your world to even more colorwork knitting projects. Don't forget to check the description below if you have any questions at all about the supplies I'm using or the pattern. You'll find links to the pattern there, which should answer any question you might have. If you haven't done so already, I would love for you to be a part of this community, so hit the subscribe button so I can keep inspiring you to make something that makes you happy. If you are subscribed, I just want you to know how much I appreciate your support, watching, liking, commenting on my tutorials, checking out the patterns on my website, or buying PDFs or merch from my shop. That stuff, although it doesn't seem like much, is an incredible help, and it really keeps this channel alive and thriving. There's honestly no way I could keep doing what I'm doing without your support. Happy knitting, and I'll see you in the next one.